Hello, my loves, and welcome to the Fluffenhammer Adjacent, and welcome to the Ages of Chaos. Now, we've done the other cult legions, which I'm collecting at the moment, the Thousand Sons, the Death Guard, and the Emperor's Children. Love them all to bits. The one we haven't done are the World Eaters. Now, the World Eaters I haven't collected for a very long time. If you're old enough, some of you listening to this may have not even been born at this point, but way back in the mists of prehistory, when I was about, I think I was about 16. No, I wasn't even that old. I would have been like 14. 15, the then new World Eaters plastic box set dropped, the Corn Berserkers plastic box set. Do you remember this one? It was one of the most revolutionary kits of its era, such that it actually replaced most of the other Chaos kits that were available. Because people were so impressed with it, they would actually buy that and then convert them into other Chaos Space Marines because it was just the best kit on the market. And we had that kit for a very long time. Up until very recently, actually, up until the last edition of Warhammer 40,000, it was a long serving kit, I can tell you. But at the time, totally revolutionary. And the amount of people who turned to playing World Eaters around that time was unbelievable. For the simple reason that you had this massive dedicated kit with you could build loads of miniatures from. I think there were 20 Corn Berserkers in that kit. It was goddamn ridiculous. And on top of that, you had loads of heads and shoulder pads and weapon variants and all sorts of things. This was back in third edition 40k. And this wasn't even the 3.5 edition. This was third edition. So, bloody hell, the original third ed codex was in play at that time. I can't quite believe it. But on the back, you also had at the same time the Trish Morrison Bloodthirster update. This it was big at the time. It's actually kind of dinky now compared to what they put out now. But you had the Trish Morrison Bloodthirster, which was this massive metal kit. So it was everything was Corn at the time. Everything was Corn, and it's really interesting because there was a time when the World Eaters were the Legion. They were the Legion that everyone collected. Everyone had a World Eaters army somewhere in their back catalogue, or they just had miniatures. They just had World Eaters miniatures somewhere simply because they were just so collectible. You had so much support for the damn things. I mean, even in right, really way back into the realms of chaos days. Back in Realms of Chaos, you technically only had 4 Chaos Space Marine Legions. You had 5 technically, because you had the Black Legion, but nobody collected them. Not back then, they didn't. You had the 4 Cult Legions. You had the Emperor's Children, Death Guard, World Eaters, and Thousand Sons, and that was it in the Realms of Chaos. And the sort of get you by Black Legion list, which nobody used. Um, and the one that people really went nuts for were the World Eaters. And the reasons for that are many and varied. One of them is, once again, even back then, there were loads of miniatures for them. There was loads of support for the World Eaters. There were demon engines, there were character models. Later on, there were Terminators. There were your. This was before there were Corn Berserkers, by the way. Corn Berserkers didn't come in until a little bit later. But you had your World Eater miniatures. You had your Cornate Chaos Squat miniatures. You had metal bloodletters and bloodthirsters and hounds of corn and all sorts of stuff. Just all sorts of stuff. So they were very, very popular. Also, one of the other reasons is that Corn and the World Eaters have to be one of the least complicated of the Chaos Space Marine legions out there. They are so simple in terms of collecting and painting and playing. You know, their color palette, it was actually a much more limited compared to their Slaneshi equivalents or their Thousand Sons or Death Guard equivalents. They primarily had black, bone, brass, and red in some variation. There were variations, but that's what they had. And the red won out in the end. When we started to transition between the first edition of Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader and into second ed, the red won out. And suddenly, Corn armies were red. They were red, 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 and very little else. Back in second ed, we not only had metal Khorne Berserker miniatures and Khornate champions on juggernauts and on foot. We also had the very first plastic Khorne Berserker boxed set. It was shit, by the way. It was absolute garbage. All of the miniatures were exactly the same. They were three-piece miniatures. You had like the torso, one arm, the little bolt pistol arm, and a backpack. That was your lot. That was it. They were dire. But on the back of that, you had lots and lots of new Corn players because they were very cheap and very easy to put together and very easy to play. That's one of the big draws consistently, actually, for the World Eaters. That's one of the big draws of them. They're so easy to play. You put them on the battlefield and you chuck them at the enemy. That's how it's always been. They have a pronounced focus on assault and close combat, which in second ed made them really powerful. In second ed, they all had the Mark of Khorne, so they had Chaos Armor, which meant they had a 2+ save. They also had Frenzy, which doubled their attacks, but they were so skilled they could actually parry while they were frenzied, which very few other miniatures could do back then. It was very strong indeed. Transition into third ed, and suddenly you have the new Chaos Space Marine Codex, and you have the new Khorne Berserkers. Now, the third ed Khorne Berserker Codex, the Chaos Codex, was not very good, let's be honest. Very few of the codices that were released early in third ed were. It was a big transition from second to third. The minute the rules were totally overhauled to make it more of a war game rather than an RPG with war game elements. And as a result, they were churning out the codices to just meet demand, so people could play. Unfortunately, the result was lots of those early codices were very flawed. The Chaos Space Marine Codex, which, by the way, back then, everything was all in one all singing, all dancing codex. You didn't have Death Guards, you didn't have Thousand Suns, you didn't have World Eaters all separate. They were all in one codex, one army list. But you had really stupid decisions. Like, for example, Khorne Berserkers were fearless back then, which meant that they ignored all leadership and morale tests. It basically meant they couldn't run away. But Khorne champions, leaders, could run away. So it just didn't make any sense at all. They were not fearless. And so they could join units that were fearless, but they were not fearless. Made no sense whatsoever. And Khorne Berserkers were not that great anyway. They were just fearless Chaos Space Marines with one extra attack. That was it. That was it. They kind of sucked back then. But they were still totally popular. And part of the reason was because of this box set. It hit and it was so revolutionary. There really wasn't anything like it in 40k back then, and certainly not amongst the Chaos Space Marines. Hardly anything. And it really did catapult Pawn armies, World Eater armies to the forefront. Fast forward a little bit to the Eye of Terror era, when the first Eye of Terror campaign starts going, and the 3.5 Codex is released, and suddenly World Eaters are it. Again, they're kind of everywhere. You have World Eaters, Black Legion, Emperor's Children, and Iron Warriors. Everyone's collecting these guys because they're so damn good. Khorne Berserkers, World Eaters armies got a load of stuff in that codex because the way the 3.5 codex worked was it was really complicated because people didn't like the simplified 3.0 version. They went nuts with the 3.5 codex and just chucked in all sorts of stuff. So the World Eaters had their own mini codex in the back of this codex that had Khornate demonic gifts and demon weapons and upgrades and the Mark of Khorne, which everything in the army had. Utterly brilliant. It was so much fun playing Khorne armies back then. So much fun. Fast forward again to the 4.0 Codex, the one we'd all rather forget. And Khorne armies drop off a cliff. They completely drop off a cliff arguably for the first time in the game's history. Pawn armies become massively unpopular. Warhammer 40,000 4.0 was all about firepower. It was all about the long range. The assault was almost useless. So an army like the World Eaters that favors almost exclusively close combat assault dropped completely off of a cliff. And by that point, the once brilliant Khorne Berserker kit was starting to look a little bit old. I mean, pity, by the way. Pity those of us that collected, for example, the Noise Marines. There was an Emperor's Children box set released with 3.5, but it wasn't that great. It was just an upgrade for the standard Chaos Space Marine kit, but there's never been a dedicated Noise Marine box set. Not ever. Not in the whole history of Warhammer 40k has there been a dedicated Noise Marine box set. Can you believe it? That will be coming, though. That will definitely be coming. And this is the first time when World Eaters just drop off a cliff. You know what brings them back? It's the Horus Heresy books. It's Aaron Dembski Bowden writing not even a World Eaters book technically, but a Word Bearers one. Betrayer, the book Betrayer, which really goes deep into the World Eaters' background, which establishes loads of new lore for them. The World Eaters, in terms of their lore, have always been really interesting. Angron is a really fascinating character. All the stuff about psychosurgery, that was there in the background, but it was very vague. The notion of the butcher's nails, for example, was not a thing. It wasn't even mentioned up until this book. The butcher's nails, which have become so significant. The notion of Angron as a gladiator, that's established in these books. The name of his homeworld, almost all of the Chaos Space Marine legions, the traitor legions, have some established background. They have like a home world that defines their character. We didn't know any of this about Angron. For some reason, that part of the background had just been kind of left aside. We didn't really know what his home world was or where he was taken from. Up until this book, then we get Nuceria, and we understand something about Angron. And suddenly, Angron, up until this point has been the most simplistic, the most straightforward of the traitor primarchs, becomes one of the most complex, one of the most interesting, one of the most psychologically profound and sympathetic. I remember when I read this book, because I like Angron fine, but he is one of my least favorite or rather, he was one of my least favorite of the traitor primarchs, because he's kind of simple. He was kind of simplistic. He was just a berserker maniac. He was just a slaughter engine and nothing else. There was nothing else to him other than that. Here, we find that Angron is ruined. Angron is this phenomenally complex guy who doesn't even believe that he should have survived. He shouldn't. The thing about Angron in the Great Crusade, he's already lost because he doesn't believe he should be alive. He should have died with his gladiator kin on Nuceria when they made their last stand, but the emperor didn't allow him that. And also, confusingly, didn't descend to help them. Do you know, he could have changed the course of the entire heresy by doing that. If he had descended with his praetorians, with his custodians, and helped Angron and the slaves, he could have won Angron's loyalty. He really could, and he doesn't. And we know that he's aware of the situation because he's been watching from orbit for years. We know he's aware of the situation. It's one of those really interesting wrinkles in the background that really does throw a lot of shade on the Emperor. Why did he do that? He's not a fool. The Emperor's been alive for X amount of thousands of millennia. He knows humanity innately and he knows his own creations, right? So, knowing that and knowing he must have at least anticipated how Angron would have reacted to this, rather than doing the correct thing, the obvious and even easy thing, because there was an entire Imperial fleet along with the World Eaters above the planet at this time. He doesn't do it. He spirits Angron away and thereby seals his own doom in certain respects, and certainly seals Angron's fate. It's a really interesting wrinkle. And after that, Angron becomes the reluctant Primarch of the World Eaters. He renames them that, by the way. Up until that point, they're called the Warhounds. And although they've got a reputation for being a bit bellicose, they're nothing close to what he will make them. Also, unlike the other legions, who glorified in the return of their Primarchs, the World Eaters don't get that chance because he slaughters half of them that are sent to parley with him. He doesn't want anything to do with them. It's only Khan that actually manages to calm him down enough to talk to him. Khan, who would become the betrayer and the destroyer of the entire legion. Um, It's really sad. That's the thing I get from the background of Angron as it's being rewritten. He's a really tragic character, a really tragic character. Even, you know what? Even when he ascends, when he becomes the Prince of Blood, the demon primarch of Khorne, the Red Angel, it's not his doing. He has no say in anything. Angron never has any agency whatsoever. When he's spirited away from the Emperor's lab, no agency there. When he crash lands on Nuceria, no agency there. When he's taken by the peoples of that planet and mutilated, having the butcher's nails installed in his mind and turned into a slave and a gladiator, he has no agency. When the Emperor plucks him up from Nuceria and leaves his fellows to die, no agency. When when he basically descends into a prolonged crusade of mania and slaughter that leads him down the path of Khorne, no agency, none whatsoever. And finally, when he is fighting Robert Guilliman in the ruins of Nuceria, it's Lorgar that uses his rage and his frustration and his anger as a conduit to Khorne and creates the warp storm around him magically that transforms him into the demon Primarch of Khorne. He doesn't even know who Khorne is at that point. Angron doesn't even know who Khorne is at that point, and yet he ascends to being one of his highest servants and lowest slaves thanks to Lorgar, thanks to the agency of others. And that is Angron to a T. That is everything about him. He is a slave always and forever, and it destroys him. He's so part of the irony of Angron is that his rage and his hatred, which is of course all Khorne really wants, that's all Khorne asks for from his servants, because that's what informs him, is aimed at himself. He hates everything. He hates the Legion that it was spawned from him. He hates the Emperor who created him. He hates the universe that allowed for this. He hates the culture that he was raised on. He hates himself more than anything because even now he's immortal, but he's a slave. He's a slave to the butcher's nails, which are still in him, by the way. And he's a slave to Khorne now. He's a slave to Khorne. And this time, there's nothing he can do about it. He's going to be a slave to Khorne for all eternity because he can't be slain. He's immortal. He's a demon. Every time his physical form is destroyed, he just howls back to the warp where Khorne refashions him and sends him out again. So he is one of the most tragic and interesting characters in 40k. And married to that, you've got the Legion itself. The Legion itself becomes more interesting the more that's written about it. Khan, fast forward a long way. The World Eaters languish for a long time in the game, by the way. Through multiple editions that favor shooting, the World Eaters, they don't really know what to do with them. They don't really know how to make them a working part of the Chaos Space Marine forces, or even a force in and of themselves. But people still collect them because they're iconic. They're absolutely iconic. The Khorne Berserkers with their cornate bunny ears, they're at least as iconic of 40k as your standard Space Marine, right? They become so recognizable. People outside the hobby know what a Khorne Berserker is. They know what it looks like. They know what the imagery is of a Khorne Berserker. Fast forward through multiple editions to the end of ninth, and finally, we get that big influx that the World Eaters have always deserved, that redesign that the World Eaters have always deserved. We get Angron for a start in his Demon Primarch form, and it is glorious. It is absolutely glorious, as we've come to expect from the Demon Primarch miniatures. It is beautiful. We get new Khorne Berserkers for the first time in over several decades. Finally, a new set of Khorne Berserkers and loads of other stuff added in. Loads of background incorporated from the Black Library books that makes this stuff canon. The Butcher's Nails, the Nuceria, his war against the High Riders, the elite of Nuceria, all this new stuff added in, a new character, the Lord Invocatus, or the Lord Avocado, as people love to call him. Khan is rewritten. Khan has been so consistent in terms of his background from his inception in Second Ed right up to this point. But here, In this codex, they introduce a tiny little wrinkle in him. He is not just a lunatic. This codex establishes that when he's not taken by the butcher's nails, he's completely sane, and he's even a fantastic commander. He's considered, he's calm, but when the butcher's nails take him, he is Khorne's animal, and that's it. He is a slaughter machine. And there's even, and I love this is completely new in this codex, there's the suggestion that he met on during the wars of Scalathrax, where the World Eaters fought the Emperor's children in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy. He may have shattered the Legion on purpose because he saw what they were becoming. He saw that they would become something worse if he didn't. And that his actions during that war are what shattered the Legion completely. This is another lovely element to the tragedy of the World Eaters. Unlike the other legions, most of the other legions anyway, they don't have any cohesion at all. They're not like the Thousand Sons or the Death Guard, for example, both of whom have homeworlds, both of whom have primarchs that they rally around, both of whom have centralized command. They're like empires in and of themselves. They're not like the Black Legion, they're not like the Word Bearers or the Iron Warriors. They're closest to the Night Lords and to the Emperor's Children, both of which are also shattered legions. They are just warbands that rove of their own accord. Some of them follow in the contrail of Angron, but he doesn't care about ruling them. He's not interested in leading them. He doesn't have any grander crusade, nor does Khan. All he's interested in is slaughter and destruction for the sake of it. That is what he's elemental. He's not like Fulgrim. He's not like Mortarion, and he's not very much not like Magnus. All of whom have their own complex agendas and plans within plans and plots within plots and schemes and designs upon the material universe. Angron doesn't have any of that. He doesn't care. He is the most lost, the most damned of the traitor Primarchs, and the most unhappy, funnily enough. I would argue. Probably the most unhappy. I mean, Mortarion and Magnus are not particularly happy with their conditions either, but they're more accepting of them. Angron is just this vessel of self-loathing forever and ever and ever. And that's what fuels him. That's what keeps him going, you know? He's like this cornate paradox where he hates his existence, but because he hates his existence, it will never end because hate fuels him. Hate makes him immortal. You know, he's the perfect cornate engine in that regard. And in since ninth ed, I mean, we're in 10th ed now, but the World Eaters play very similarly in 10th ed than they did in ninth ed. It's slightly different, but it's pretty similar. They are wonderful. They're such a good army in 10th ed. I think they're a bit of a sleeper hit, to be honest. I fought against them, and they're bastards. They're absolute bastards. I fought against them with my Death Guard not too long ago, and they steamrolled us. They absolutely steamrolled us because they have a lot of internal cohesion. There's a lot of synchronicity between units and detachments and special rules and whatnot that works so well for them. And a canny commander can really take advantage of that. They are a bit more difficult to use than some of the other cult legions because they don't have the diversity. They certainly don't have the firepower. But if you can make them work, if you can really understand them, they're absolutely brilliant. Hobby wise, they're fantastic. Like all the cult legions, hobby wise, they're wonderful because you can go nuts with them. You can have world eaters with like bits of ripped off armor, with mutations, with skulls and spikes. You can go nuts with the weapons because the weapons are big and baroque. You can have like, you can cross pollinate them with the Blades of Corn stuff from Age of Sigmar, and it works really well. Crossing Corn Berserkers with Blood Warriors, mwah, Chef's Kiss works so well. Or the eight bound with Skull Takers. Yeah. Mwah, lovely. It works so beautifully. You've basically got like double the miniatures range if you collect World Eaters, because you can just go to the AOS range and pluck stuff from there as well, and it works. It works really well. They're a lovely army. Hobby wise, painting wise, they can be very simple. They can be very easy. Painting red is actually quite easy. Brass and bone, quite easy. Black is generally quite easy. So again, there's a lot of appeal there. There's a hell of a lot of appeal. They've got their Primarch, they've got Angron, and he is kick ass. That miniature, I want that miniature, I can tell you. I've got the other two. I've got Morty and I've got Magnus, I've got to get Angron as well because just to complete the set, right? Just to have him because he is so beautiful. I just love him to bits. Um, yeah, World Eaters. They're straightforward. They're a lot of fun to play, and of course, I mean, one of the fun things is how they operate philosophically as well. Just remember, corn cares not from whence the blood flows, and nor should you.